Hi. Hey, welcome back. I am your host, Jess. I have with me today a guest. This is Melissa. And I met you through Instagram, through another podcast that I had done with Crystal Dawn, where we talked about deconstructing religion. And you had reached out to me and told me a bit about what you do. And we thought it would be an interesting conversation to have on. So this is our first time speaking outside of Instagram DMing. So it's so lovely to meet you. Welcome to the podcast. Would you please tell everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, my name's Melissa. I'm in Oregon. I grew up in Southern California, so I've become a Pacific Northwest girly. It's dreary this time of year. I have a wild faith and deconstruction journey that eventually, I'm sure we'll talk about, led me to rebuilding my faith and rebuilding connection to God. And that is a piece I'm particularly interested in this day and age, where we've had this wave of men and women that have left faith and pointed out its religion's flaws, rightfully so. But then what happens when you've had a lifetime of religious programming and one way of thinking about God? How do you actually rebuild that in a meaningful, genuine way? And that's what I do. That's what I support women in, rebuilding their relationship to God and their faith after they've deconstructed. Or I've worked with a lot of women that are still like in that questioning phase, and they're like, I just have no idea how to relate to him or to faith, or maybe they still want to stay going to church, but it's so hard to do that when you have so many layers of that religious programming. So that's what I'm really passionate about doing. And like a lot of people, my own journey has inspired this. So
Yeah. So, tell us about your journey, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I grew up in evangelical Christianity. And I grew up in the height of purity culture. I had that purity ring on my finger. I grew up in a Christian and Missionary Alliance church, so it was all about save the people. We had like this thing called the 1040 window on the wall of our church, which is like this box of like, these are where the most lost people live, and we got to go there and we got to save them. Literally, it was a map of the world and then a box of like, this is where like the worst
Where
of
was
it
the
is.
box?
Over like Europe and Asia, like this like 40 by 80 like
Okay.
box of like,
right.
Yeah, I know, right?
Okay.
I
Yeah.
just remember it
Okay.
was just like huge on the wall, and was like, there, we gotta go there. And for me, I always tell people, like, yes, my parents raised me religious, but I was hardcore about it. So I have a theory about, I really enjoy the Enneagram. I'm not as obsessed with it these days as I used to be, but I'm a 1. And so we're really obsessed with like good and bad and right and wrong. And evangelical Christianity really feeds that, right? There's one way, there's one truth, only one option in this life. So I got really hardcore about it. I wanted to be a missionary. No wonder. I grew up in that environment. And so I went to school. I went to a Christian Missionary Alliance school and got a degree in Bible and theology. I was like hardcore. And I loved church, right? I loved it growing up. I was a leader. I mentored tons of women. I've been doing women's work since literally high school. But it was within this, like, you have to be in this box and do this certain way. And this is the right or wrong way to relate to the world, to men, to yourself, to your family, to your purpose, to God. And then I moved to a little town on the Oregon coast. And long story short, how long was I going to that church? 2012. So about 7 years. And I can look back and see that even in college, some things started to crumble. Like my mind was a little bit like, what? Like like that doesn't make sense. Like I remember being in a class, it was like a world religions class, and I remember thinking, wait, other people think about God differently. Like other people have a different construct of God. That blew my tiny mind. It blew my tiny mind. And so I can look back now, and even in one of my upper level theology classes talking about atonement, like the different ways that people understood Jesus's death. And I was like, wait, we don't all agree on this. And I can look back and see how in my brain I was like, yeah, that's weird. Like, what? Um, And so in 2019, I left the tiny church that I was attending. And the impetus for that was that the pastor's son took over the church, and I wasn't a fan of his, but I was like, I'll give him a year. And close to the year mark, in a sermon, he said, the reason that I believe Paul tells women they can't teach men is because women's emotions cloud their ability to interpret scripture correctly.
Hmm.
And the thing for me about that, as a theology person, as a scholar, I was like, that is incredibly irresponsible. For me, how I perceived that was you stood up there and spoke your opinion. Now, I could give you a theological, like a scriptural argument for that, for like only men. Like I could give you like somewhat of like a decent argument for that. So for him to stand up there and teach his opinion, when I know that a human being's most formative years are 0 to 3, 0 to 5, who's teaching our 0 to 5-year-olds?
Hmm.
Women are.
Hmm.
And so I was like pretty outraged at the irresponsibility of that. But I had zero intention of leaving my faith. I was just like, I'm out of here. I didn't like this church very much, anyways. And there was a podcast called the Liturgist Podcast that was really popular at the time. And once I left, like once I stopped physically going to that space all the time, I felt a little bit of freedom. And I was like, I've heard about this podcast and it's like really like progressive Christianity. And I started listening. And it was actually like a deconstruction process. It was these faith leaders in the evangelical church that had deconstructed and left. I didn't really know that at the time. I didn't even know what that term was.
Hmm.
And within weeks, I had completely deconstructed my entire belief system. Normally, it takes people a lot of time, years. They'll stay in church for years questioning and doubting. Mine was just like,
Yeah, but
we're
kudos to
done.
you for that because I think a lot of the times people are just so against letting go of that identity and
Yeah.
and so the fact that you were like, wait, and then you actually opened up your mind because sometimes when people are like, what radicalized you? There's things like, people go like empathy and that's true. I totally but when I think about Christianity, for me
Yeah.
personally, and people like what radicalized you, I'm like critical thinking, I think is
Yeah.
like, like I literally was like, wait, what? Because I was Christian when I moved over here. I still identified as Christian, and we have a small little church, and I had gone to a Southern Baptist church, and I actually
Okay.
loved the pastor. He was like a musical theater major in Kansas, and
Oh, fun.
he we would put on these musicals every year. Like he was fantastic, and he did preach a lot of opinion, but his opinions were always very love based. The people in the church, maybe not so much a fan of, but I had a similar situation that he left, he stopped preaching, and then suddenly it was someone else who was like a grandstander, which is what I see a lot in the States now that I've moved here and I go to this little church. I hated going to this church when I first got here because the sermons were so factual. They were like,
Mm.
we're gonna read this scripture, and then we're gonna talk about like what time it was written in, who read. Like it was just knowledge based, and I was like, where's the fun? Like where's the opinion and like
Mhm.
that? I actually kind of missed that, and now I'm like, oh, I see a lot in the States. It becomes people preaching not because they want to preach the word, but because they want the pulpit.
It's a
And
show. Mhm.
exactly. Yeah. Sorry. Keep going.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, right. And so part of the not appreciating the son that took over this church was also was like in this tiny town, and he had never left. I think he had gone
Hmm.
up to like somewhere in Oregon for like a year of college, and he was like, I don't need this. And so he had extremely limited life experience. So then it was also like that influences your ability to like teach and speak about the world and how it works and people. And right, they were more they different preachers have different things that are really important to them that they hone in on at different motivations. Like, yeah, the church that I grew up in Southern California was like big time show and
Hmm.
lights, and I was a mega church. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was a producer of services. Like, we did 5 services a weekend. Like, it was, yeah,
Yeah.
it was crazy. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny. I haven't thought about that in a while. Like, why do I think that is that I was able to deconstruct so quickly? And my only thought is the cracks had started forming early and I just didn't know. And then it was physically leaving the space, right? Because when you're in the space and you're going every week and you're part of that community, it's not safe. Like your system knows that it's not safe to question or to like, push back.
It's in a
And
lot of
so,
situations, thankfully not for everybody,
yes,
but a lot of situations it is basically tantamount to an abusive relationship. You're
right,
shamed, you're really treated as if this is your
right,
only salvation, and if you leave
right.
this, you are a sinner, you're evil, you're wrong. And so of course, you're like, this is terrifying to leave this what I
Yeah,
know.
you're
So yeah.
programmed to just like stay in line. Yeah, so everything fell apart and that was a really wild season. That was my first really big awakening, like
Mhm.
waking up to, oh my God, all of this is a construct.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all a construct. Yeah,
Can I
and
just
and you
say that
tore it
like
all
one of
down.
my biggest revelations for my life is that literally everything is a construct. Like your
Yeah,
life that you've built
I
is a
know.
construct. Everything everybody
Crazy.
tells you, it's just your perception. And we get so stuck of like,
I
this is
know.
how it is. And it's like, I'm always asking like, but why is it like this? And do I want it to be
Mm,
like that? Do I agree with that? I can now have a say because it's taken me. I also deconstructed. I deconstructed very slowly and then it was immediate. It was like
mm.
this pulling back, and I had lots of cracks my whole life, but I would just kept like putting band-aids over them. I was like, this is fine. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's okay. And then all of a sudden just the egg shattered and like it was I couldn't see it anymore. All I could see was this is so inherently flawed and against everything I know about people and love. And like I
Mm,
still believe in what Jesus teaches. I still believe in the words
mm,
that he said
mhm,
and his view. I personally feel that the Bible has opted those teachings in a lot of cases and tried to fit them into a certain narrative. So I think a lot of people don't think of it that critically when you're in the religion because you're told that you this is what it is. And so you have to take the whole thing. And I'm like, but I don't have to take the whole thing. I can appreciate that Jesus was a wonderful teacher who taught out of love and empathy and understanding and taking care of others. And in the same book, there is a lot of very harmful teachings. And therefore, I personally was like, that was for me where I was like, but I can't identify with Christianity as a whole because as a religion, it's based on the Bible. And
mm,
90% of the Bible doesn't resonate with me. Therefore, I'm not. But I can still think that Yeshua, Jesus, was a wonderful teacher and still follow many of his teachings. And I feel like, so you found me from the post with Crystal where we talked about it.
mhm,
On my other account, which is about how I healed my relationship with myself via my connection to witchcraft and folk healing and things like
mm,
that, I had a video go viral there. Like, I think it's at like 1.8 million or something now. And that was about religion as well. So I'm like, am I on earth to help deconstruct people's beliefs and like find the sovereignty in themselves? Like there's a pattern or a theme here. Like it wasn't
mm,
something I wanted to do, but it apparently I think it's just because right now it's a very hot topic. But it was basically a conversation I had with my youngest daughter where she's learning about world religions because here they have a world religions class that goes over many years. And they start off with Christianity. So I don't talk about Christianity in the house. We tend to celebrate, I mean, we celebrate Christmas and Easter because they're cultural. So it's not like we go to church or anything. We just have off school basically and do Christmas stuff. And she was asking about Christmas decorations and I kept calling them holiday decorations. And she was like, why are you calling them holiday? I was like, well, because we don't celebrate Christmas. And she was like, why? I'm like, because we're not Christian. And she was like, what?
mm.
And I was like, well, we're not Christian.
Blew her
And
tiny mind.
she was like, I am. And I was like, oh, you are? And she goes, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, is it because you learned about it in school or because you think you are? And she said, because I think I am. And I said, okay, well, that's the most important then. It was like a 15-second clip. It was just me validating that I want to be open to anything that she comes with. Like I didn't have that in my household. It was, no, you're not anything else. You're a Christian. And I was
Mm,
like, and it's still that way. My mom is a little bit more accepting now, but it was very much that way. And I don't want that with my kids. And it went massively viral. And I will say there was a lot of really lovely Christian people who came, mostly women, again, who came and said how they really appreciated the openness in the conversation. There was also a lot of Christian people calling me demonic, telling me
yeah.
I'm going to hell. And I kept trying to answer these with empathy of like, Jesus taught love and acceptance.
Mm.
One guy's like, you shall not let a witch suffer to live. And I'm like, okay, so I just want you to know that's actually like a death threat. And he's like, it's in the Bible. It's just a verse. I'm like, you are not understanding how many serial killers, men justify violent crimes against especially women with Bible verses. So just FYI, I've taken a screenshot of this if I ever need it. You should be more careful of the things you say to people. But I feel like people a lot of the times justify behavior with the, quote unquote, uglier parts of the Bible. But then they're like, it's about love. And I'm like, but Jesus said to love, and you are not doing that. Like,
I
what
think
part of this was love?
that's a part for me as I like started sharing more on my Instagram about this. That's so interesting to me is that so my work is helping people that have left restore relationship with God, faith, even church, if that feels true to them. And these people still comment on that with extreme hatred and disgust and judgment. I'm like, wait, I'm helping them like come back's not the right phrase because it's not coming back in the same way, but it's still like restoration, and they can't even support that in any way because the things that I say are not exactly how they think about it. Particularly if I start using different gendered language for God, that really triggers people. Yeah, the scripture piece was a big part of my deconstruction journey too, and there were two things that really shifted how I viewed scripture. One is understanding the difference between how Christians approach scripture and like how Judaism does it. Whereas like Judaism is approaching scripture from a place of curiosity, like they read it and then they leave with the question, as opposed to Christians go in with a question and leave with a this
Yeah.
is the answer. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? And then the other thing that I still carry with me as I relate to scripture is that scripture is how those people perceived God at that point in time on this planet.
Totally.
That's
Yeah.
it. Like,
Like,
it's
when was
so
this written?
right.
You
So the
know?
things that are quote unquote like wrong and harmful, it's like that's just how they understood the divine 4,000 years ago, as opposed to like, yeah. So that's helpful for me. And then I had a conversation recently with a colleague about this, and it is the further I get on my journey, it is harder for me to relate to people that interpret it as just like right, but the Bible is just true. It's just inerrant. It's without error, the inerrancy of it. And like, but that's what the Bible says. And I'm just like, to your earlier point, it defies rational logic. It's just
Yeah.
like, but
Yeah.
but
I mean,
it's
I
the
feel
book.
like as a
Like
woman, how like I have this. I mean, to be honest, I don't have these discussions with my mom anymore because I've tried to
yeah.
help her to think like from a more open standpoint, and it ain't happening. So I've
Yeah.
just accepted that this is the relationship, and it's not my job. Just like it's not her job to try to bring me back to the church, it's not my job to make her see any differently, right? So I've stopped these conversations, but I've said things like, "Mom, you consider yourself a feminist. Where in a lot of this scripture that you're believing in the Bible, do you think that that feels like the God and the Jesus that you know? To say things like women can't speak in the church, or to your point, like women shouldn't teach men. Like what loving, compassionate God would want women to be treated that way when he says everyone's equal? And I'm also just like, where are the books written by the women? Why would Jesus not teach any women but have Mary Magdalene, but all the apostles are men? All of the books are written by men. My mom doesn't like men. And so I'm like, you don't even
Mm.
like men. Why are you listening to everything they say? I mean, I was like, this is equivalent to reading some self-help book from a guy and not questioning it at all and just taking all of that information as, this is the truth, even if it doesn't resonate with you. This is the same thing. They say it's the word of God, but it's written by the hands of men. And we know what men do in this day and age with information. And I'm using men in this case because of the Bible. Everybody can manipulate, of course. But, you know, we know what they do now. I'm also like, this is such a random thing, but I worked in advertising and marketing and PR for 15 years. And I'm like, do you
Mm.
know the copy, the writing, the manipulation tactics that we use to sell something or to get someone to buy into something? Brand loyalty, you're creating a version of your brand that you want people to feel connected to. And at its best, it's true, it's authentic. But I've worked for a lot of brands where it's not true and authentic.
Mhm.
They know who you are, they know who the target audience is, they knew who are the people who are going to buy into it the most. And then they go after them with the messaging that reaches them. You know, I think when you start to critically look at things and you go, the poorest people in the US, for example, if we just take one country, are tend to be the most devout because there's a lot of copy in the Bible that talks a lot about being devout, being poor and caring for the
Blessed are
poor.
the poor.
Poor
Yeah.
exactly. There's a lot of talk about this. And I'm like, it's not that I don't believe that God loves everybody. I totally believe that he does. I'm just saying, look at what's said in the Bible and the people who are telling you this and the reality. It doesn't match up, you know? But you're told to shut your brain off, like you said earlier. You're told not to question anything. And
It's
tell us
just
more
like a
about
lot
how
of
you lead
things.
women back to it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just like a lot of things, uh, so they can control you,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally.
And so when I'm working with women, the thing that I've seen even in my own journey, it's even been creeping up recently, um, in a new partnership is like that I think of them as just like tendrils, like there's like these tendrils of like religious programming that are just still so
Mhm,
ingrained in your system from religion. And even when you've left, or even if you've questioned and you're like, I don't believe that anymore, you are left with so much impact of that
mhm,
programming in your system.
totally.
Like,
Yeah. I mean, I'm a
so much.
somatic practitioner, so I work a lot with people who are holding things in their body and their subconscious, and especially as women, my God, the amount of things that you hold on to. I mean, the shame, for example, in it hits you in the weirdest ways where you don't
Yep.
realize, you know? And yeah, you're right. Like this religious indoctrination, especially if you were younger, it sits heavy in you and you have to release it. And I said this last time and I'll say it again. I have lovely Christian friends who are full of love and compassion and caring. And like I said, I had that pastor who was amazing, and it wasn't an outreach church in that way, but we did so much community work where we weren't preaching. We were literally just going and volunteering or doing something and learning about giving back. So it's not that all Christianity is bad, but this like feral, even like the evangelical where you're like really feeling like I have to save your soul. And I feel like a lot of the times I try to always hold space and be empathetic because I've been there and I know what it feels like and I know you can come out of it. And I know that talking back with hatred doesn't do anything good for anyone, yourself or the other person. So a lot of times I just don't answer, but I've tried to answer. But what I really want to say sometimes is, who are you trying to convince? Me or you?
Yeah.
Because you can
Right.
feel it from them. This is what they've
Yes.
been told. And they're like, I don't fully believe this, but I have to believe it because if I don't believe this, everything is a lie to me and I lose myself completely. And then who am I and what's the point of living? And it's really hard to let go of that identity, especially the longer you've had it. I think about um, all these like things that you could go through in life and you do them because you think they're the right thing. And then if you suddenly deconstruct, of course the thought will come back in of, I did all of those things thinking it was the right thing, and really it was so wrong, and I did it for this whole lie and everything, and it could be incredibly hard. So I do think it's lovely that you're helping women do that. I also help women with the sovereignty in themselves because we
Mhm.
outsource all of our
Yeah.
power and validation, and
We
like
give
you
it all
said.
away. Yeah.
Exactly, and like you said, it affects everywhere in your life. Like I, for example, in my career that I was in, I look back and go, I didn't make one decision for myself about where I wanted to go in my career. I let my male bosses tell me where they thought I should go, or I would ask their opinion of what I should do. And I needed always to get their okay on stuff because I really didn't have that sovereignty, that power, that confidence that I was able to do all those things for myself. And I knew what was best for me because I'd spent so many years being told, you don't know what's best for you. Because especially, this is an important point, when you have a lot of cognitive dissonance with something and you feel it's a certain way, but you're told it's not, you lose all sense of self and your ability to make decisions, to know what's right and wrong.
1000%.
Because you're
Yeah.
like, well, if I feel like this is right, but I'm being told it's completely wrong, then I obviously don't know what I'm doing, you know? So I also help women with like, you have everything in there and God lives in here. He doesn't live in the church pews or anything else. Like he's in you. That sounds creepy. Um, and again, I also say like, I think God is genderless. I use the word he because
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what I said for 30 something years. It's the
Right.
most natural thing to say, right?
Totally.
Um,
Same.
but your relationship with any God, no whatever what that is inherent to you. You can steer that relationship. You don't need to go anywhere or do anything. If that's helpful for you, that's great. But it's what you need, right?
Yeah. The piece around not like knowing who you are and what to do, like that was a huge part of my journey and that I see in a lot of women because you grow up in this environment where they tell you everything, how to be, how to think, how to act, what to
Hmm.
do. And so even when I was starting to I remember this so strongly when I was starting to feel called back to some sort of faith and relationship with God, I was a mess. Like I just was like and it was like that dissonance. I remember sitting with a shaman and I said to him, like, I do not know how to fit God into my brain anymore. I remember saying
Mm,
that phrase of like, I don't know what to do with this concept of the divine or God because for over 30 years, it was just this one way of relating to the divine. And I literally didn't know how to do it anymore. And so I see that a lot in women. And the other piece that I see like is one of the main pieces that I work with women around is fear around what other people will think, right? So
mm,
that's leftover programming and codependency and nervous system stuff where I was working with a woman who grew up in the Mormon church. And so she was still questioning. I think she had stopped going to church, but she was just like, could not function in life because she was so worried about
mm,
what her family would think, especially Mormonism, right? Mormonism is like, you one toe out of line, excommunication, like your whole livelihood is gone. And so there's just this like inordinate amount of fear around choosing for herself.
mm. Yeah.
And like, but what's going to happen? And what we discovered through that series was like that her mind had severely blown that out of proportion. Like most people were like fine with it. Like no one like loved it or whatever. And she has in fact slowly started to return from a place of this is where my family goes. Like this is sort of my like lineage and where my familial community happens. She doesn't believe all of the things. She does right. She doesn't buy
Mhm.
in. And yet we did enough nervous system somatic work that she's able to hold the nuance of like where she's at with her faith and still participate in a way that makes sense for her. And for some people, they would never dream, they would never even want to step foot back into a church, and that's amazing, but every woman's journey is so different, but that piece around, like, what are people gonna think is, like it's like this huge monster that is, like, they're battling with every single day because of all that religious programming of, like it feels like death, it feels like fear of
Yeah.
death in
Yeah. Yeah.
your body, of course it does.
Yeah. I mean, it's ironic in a way because everything in the church is supposed to be about no judgment. And literally, it is the judgiest place in the world. Like, I have a lot of religious trauma from the people, like, again, on that video, I get called out all the time because I said, We don't go to church." People are like, "It's not about church, it's about Christianity." And I'm like, you need to hold space for different experiences in different languages and chill out for a second. Like, we called everything church because
Mm.
where I was growing up
Mhm.
and the church I was going to, you were not a Christian outside of church. Church was Christianity. Church
Yeah.
was your religion?
Yes.
So we just called it church all the time. Everything was church. Like I fully understand Christianity is about your religion or your relationship with Jesus Christ and God. I get it. But the language was church. And it was really problematic because the church dynamics, despite our very lovely pastor, again, we had these, for example, we had these musicals, right?
Mhm.
The parents were the worst because they wanted their kid to be the lead. And so,
Uh-huh.
for example, I was at 10 years old, chose to play Annie in the musical. The amount of bullying from the parents to a 10-year-old child, I still remember, and they still affected me to this day around body image, my voice, my abilities, talking about favorites and things like there. And there was a lot of, you know, they would say, like, it was ironic too, because they would be like, I knew that it was because they wanted their daughter to be the lead, but then they would be saying these things about pridefulness and boastfulness and these things towards me as if I was sinning by
Yeah.
being the lead in this play that I was chosen for at 10. Meanwhile, they want their own daughter to be the lead instead. It was crazy. So I had wonderful memories at church with the children, but the people in it were some of the most unchristlike people. And I think, as I said, I always try to have empathy in everything, but I really have an honest anger at people who
Mm.
call themselves Christian and are the most unchristian people in the world. And I think, to your point, a lot of people don't get outside that bubble. So
Yeah.
that's all they know. And then they assume that that's the best way to be and that's the only way to be. Like the
The right
Christians,
way to be.
exactly. Like there's definitely pockets of more, like orthodox or conservative or of these kind of things. But the general like religious vibe in Europe is so much more like chill, I would say.
Mm.
Like the people are just like, I go to church or mass or whatever, I go home. Like it's not, yes, it's community when you're at the church and stuff, and maybe there's some events, but it's not like where I went to, like that was your family and you
And
did
it's your
everything.
identity, your whole
Exactly.
identity. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that, anything you did, even when you were in the church, anything you did was like, are they going to talk about me? Are they going to use this against me? How's this going to look? I have to be perfect. I can't make mistakes. And all of these things you carry through with you in life, and it does jack up your nervous system.
And all of it is, and this is a teaching from my teacher, is like it's all also very externally oriented. So
Mhm.
if you are struggling with something in life and you need to make a decision, it's like, oh, just ask Jesus, or like read the Bible more, or it's go outside of yourself to find the answer, as opposed to what you said is like the divine is you, is
Yeah,
in
yeah.
you. Like there is this, like this has been my path the last couple of years. Like there is a river of truth that runs internally, but most of us don't have access to that. And if you grew up religious, you were not only taught, ugh, this is the part that still like gets me. Not
Mhm.
only were you taught to go outside of yourself for answers and for direction, you were taught that that internal thing within you is evil and can't be trusted and sinful, and that you came out of your mother's womb a disgusting soul damned for hell, and so you can't, and this like glorious vessel that our souls came down here to inhabit is evil, and you can't trust the flesh. But it's like everything we do in life is experienced and like alchemized through our
Yeah.
body, but it's evil and distrustful, and like a way that we taunt men and lead them astray. Like you just from the inside out, you're taught that everything about who you are and what you came here to do is evil, and then you need to go outside yourself to figure out the answers. And I think that's one of the hardest pieces to
Yeah.
unravel. Is like,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of contradictions in the Bible because on the one hand, we're made in God's image, right? But on the other hand, we're screwed from birth. We're gross. We have to be saved. I mean, like there was a lot of things like that where, again, with my critical thinking lens, I was like, wait. I mean, there was a period before I completely left where I had tried to make it work basically. So I have been like, I'm going to disregard the Old Testament because that was
oh, okay.
before Jesus. So
Hmm.
I don't believe that stuff that was written before Jesus came along. So therefore it's not valid because we follow his teachings, right? But there was still so much within the New Testament that I was like, I mean, it also just was like, you know, I don't think that I'm the best person in the world. So what I'm about to say is not me saying I'm the best person because I have for sure and a half made mistakes. I will continue to do so. I will always be learning and growing. That is my love. I think everyone should embrace the fact that we constantly make mistakes and learn from them, and that's beautiful. But I'm looking at like some of these people who are literally horrible people and claim to be Christian. And then people who are, for example, Muslim. Like I didn't know any Muslims when I lived in the States. And then I moved over here. I met a bunch of Muslim people. And I had been so scared of them in a way because of what Christianity had said and taught about the Crusades and all these things. Like I really thought that this was a violent religion. And then I met all these Muslim people and I was like, these are the loveliest, caring, nicest people. And they take much better care of like poor people. And it's
Mm.
actually built into a lot of their holidays. And like, wait a second, what's kind of going on here? And I'm like, I literally started thinking like, so Muhammad, the guy who takes rolls that he bakes and goes and delivers them to the homeless shelters and brings leftover food out is going to hell? Like what God would do that to somebody? And it's so many of these things where I just was like, this doesn't sit
Now,
well with me personally.
when you had kids, so this is the argument that I hear a lot from Christians is like, well, just look at your toddler. Like, of course, your toddler is like, quote unquote, inherently bad because the toddler is always misbehaving. So then how did you like, right. But that's a very like, I have family members that are like, that use their kids as an example of that theology of like, right, you come out bad. So how do you relate to, like, that piece of, like, your little ones, quote, unquote, misbehaving or acting.
I mean, I literally I went through a phase where I found being a mother extremely difficult. So I think when I hear things like that, what I hear is being a parent is hard, but you want
Yeah.
an excuse that takes it
Mm.
out of you. And so it's my kids aren't bad because they're children and this is natural and they're testing limits and this is exactly what kids are meant to do and we're meant to support them. What I hear is I'm really struggling and this is really
Mm.
hard for me and I don't want to have to admit that. So I'm going to use it as again justification. My kids are difficult because that's how they're supposed to be because they're bad. Like I would never put that on my
Yeah.
kids. My children are angels. I love them to death. I think they're blessing. Like how can a parent be like children are a blessing but they're also
Never.
evil? It's again
And I
like
also
what?
think it's like a lens, right? So, like,
Yeah.
you have chosen to look through a lens of this is what they do. Like, their personhood, they're, like, growing in their autonomy, and so they're coming in and they're, like, learning. Of course, they're gonna, like, push boundaries and act out, and they also have nervous systems that are sensitive to the home and what's
Yeah.
going on in the
Yeah.
home and what's
Yeah.
going on in the relational dynamics, as opposed to coming into it with the lens of, like, "Well, we are inherently evil, and we come and then that's the lens by which you're going to then interpret the evidence that is in front of you. You're gonna pull what's happening as evidence for the lens and the belief that you
Well, have you ever
hold
heard of
about
this thing called the
humanity.
mother wound?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I relate a lot of religious trauma in ways to the mother wound and the fact that if your parents were raised Christian and then they raised you Christian, inherently there's probably again those things because we're all individual people that rankled in them, but they had to obey. They had to do it even though they didn't like to. So then they teach you the same thing because that's what they're programmed to do.
Mhm.
And then you're
Mhm.
an individual person. So then you
Yeah.
rankle against that. And so you act out. Because I will say I have two kids. One of them was born when I was still Christian. And this is maybe not related to Christianity. This is probably more related just to in general all of the wounds I was walking around with like little grenades inside of me that could go off at any minute, didn't know about them, right? Because I was not awake to I was in psychology, like therapy and stuff, but I was not awake to the whole mother wound and somatic healing and all this other stuff. Um, and then I have one that was born after I did a lot of work and was a much more, let's say, healed, for lack of a better word, person. And I will say there, I had a very different experience raising them because one got all of my upbringing. So, like, if she spilled water, it was, "You have to be more careful. You need to pay attention to what you're doing." Whereas the
Mhm.
little
Mhm.
one, I didn't have that anymore because that was something I deprogrammed that I had heard and been told as a kid. And so the little one got, "Oops, that's okay. Let's just get a towel and
Wow.
wipe it up, you know? That's just a spill. It's all right. It's an accident. It happens," right? Two completely different. And luckily, I think I did a lot of the healing work before I had, um, when the older one was younger still. So I could see a really big difference in her nervous system because she's not terrified of making mistakes and doing these things. And I kind of liken religion that to that in a way. Because if you're a woman who knows that you're not evil and knows that you're not the source of all sin and knows that you're not, that you're allowed to be a sexual being or something, but has never been able to live that way and feels repressed, you will pass it on. And I
Mhm.
think that's another thing when you talk
Mhm.
about women are teaching other women, like, I believe that that's a wonderful thing. However, when it's women who've been raised in a toxic system, teaching women the same toxic system, it continues this cycle, and because we're learning it from women, it holds more gravitas in a way, and it can be
Yeah,
extremely detrimental.
how did you maintain your connection to God or the divine? Like, what did that look like
I
once
definitely
you
think I
finally
lost it for a
left?
little bit.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Um, I I went through a phase of I have no clue what it could
Mhm.
possibly be, and I don't know if there is a God at all, and what's the point, and, um, I think what saved me a lot was my curiosity, so I got to this bottom of, like, maybe there's not even a God, and I just have been living these repressed ways for 30 something years of my life, and I missed out on all this other stuff, and then was doing the healing work, and I was as part of somatic healing, I was trying a lot of different therapies from the East, for example, where like indigenous practices that were open to me and like breath work, for example. I did a lot of breath work and I started to feel God in a different way. And so I started to feel the fact, like we talked about, that oneness, that unconditional love, it's always with me. I always have it. It's not all these rules, it's not all this shame. It's literally just unconditional love and acceptance. I don't view God as somebody in the sky who's controlling everything and blaming some people and punishing other people and rewarding these people. I mean, that was another thing for me was like it talks so much about how God rewards all the devout, but the poorest people in the US are the most devout and they're still constantly struggling. I can't believe in a God like that. I can't believe in a scripture or a God like that. So I don't my relationship with God is not it's also, by the way, fully undefined, and that's how most of my beliefs
Yeah.
are. I
Yeah.
accept that I know nothing. I only know my experience of it. So I don't try to put God in a box anymore because that's something I experience with women when I help them connect to their internal witch or their intuitiveness or their psychic abilities or whatever I'm helping them with. They always want instruction. So they're like, "What do I do?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "What are you interested in? Like, what kind of stuff do you look at?" And they want me to tell them exactly what to do, and I'm like, "We're gonna work on that because you will know what to do. I can give you some, like,
Mhm.
guidance, of course. You need to learn to come home and trust yourself because that's been taken away from you for so long." Religion is a system of this is how it is, this is the right way to do it, this is the wrong thing to do, and you have to follow it. Whereas this more spiritual, intuitive way of being is I can learn more, I can discover more, and I get to decide what things work for me, how I use them. And the more you get in touch with yourself, the more you'll realize you don't actually need to look up different stuff. You can just start to feel what feels good to you. And it's beautiful. You know, like no one starts in the same place. I can always give like basic guidelines of like, this is a good place to start if you really don't know. But I always encourage people of like, we're going to get to know who you are. That's the number one step because you lose that in this other identity that that you wear. And so, yeah, I don't have a definition and I allow it to be that way. I don't try to put it in a box. I just experience it and I know they're there. Like for example, I know I have guides and I talk to them every single day and people are like, "Who are your guides?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I don't care." Some people will be like, "Oh, are they angels? Are they extraterrestrials? Are they ancestors?" And I'm like, "I know their energy signature. I know how they talk to me. I know that I love their guidance and their help and their support," which by the way, sometimes I say no to their
Mhm.
guidance and they're like, "Okay." And it's totally fine. There's no punishment or shame or anything. I don't have to do anything. But I try not to think too much into it. And I think that I do that on purpose because I lived for so
Mhm.
long
Yes,
where I
same.
wasn't able to do that, right? Is that so how
Same.
was your coming back as well?
Yeah, yeah, very much same on that last piece. What happened was I left and I deconstructed and there were some other life circumstances that happened and um also at the time, so I jumped all the way from, like, conservative religion all the way to the other side of the aisle, which I see a lot of women do. We just do a 180 and we're like, "Oh, those people over there have the answer." And actually, what I realized is, oh, they're actually doing the same exact thing that these conservative people are doing. They're just using different words. It's very tricky. And so I actually met I never met them in person. It was two men online dating, and they were like, we'd have these like deep conversations and we'd connect like intellectually and spiritually. And they were like, what are you talking about? Like, I was just kind of spouting more like woke ideology. Like, it was the height of COVID, right? I was like in more of that space. And they're like, what's wrong with you? And I realized that I actually didn't know anything about anything and
Mhm.
that I lived my whole life just being fed and I was just regurgitating. So I did a self-imposed year of I don't know, and it was my spiritual practice at the time. So like I am known in my life and in my circles as like a quote unquote smart person. So people come, oh, I want to know what does Melissa think, and like
Mhm.
what would Melissa say about this? And so it was quite a spiritual practice to I didn't allow myself to have opinions about things or like beliefs or like this is the way it is for a whole year. And I just adopted like a beginner's mind and I started again. I was like, I don't know shit about economics or race or gender. I actually don't know anything. And
Mhm.
so at the end of that year, I had done a lot of reading and learning, and I started to it allowed me to form some foundational things about the way that I understood certain things in society to work. So for example, this is my personal belief is like religion actually serves a really important function, particularly in America. Does that mean that I think everyone needs to participate and that there's nothing wrong with it? No, of course, but there is something about the success of this nation that was built on Christian principles that I think we should not just throw the baby out with the bathwater because that's not always helpful. And we can continue to move in this direction of refining and peeling out the things that are unhelpful. So I get to the end of that and I'm still sort of living a little bit in like hookup culture and some of these more like again I like kind of swung all the way to the other side. And then honestly it happened without um conscious effort. I moved to Eugene where I live now, and then all of a sudden I was like, I think I want to like it's so crazy to say. I was like, "I think I wanna go back to church." It came out of absolutely nowhere, and that led me to work with a mentor, for 3 or 4 months, specifically around restoration of my relationship to God. Like, I just did not know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. I felt this, like, call to return to some kind of faith. I had never abandoned belief in God, but I didn't like, I didn't go as far as you did as far as, like, maybe there is no God. I never went there, but, like, I had no real relationship to the divine once I left.
It was
And
just
so
there, but you were like,
yeah, I was like, I believe it's there, but, like, I don't know how to, like, relate to it or what I think about it or what I believe about it. And some of that, to your earlier point, was conscious, and I
mm,
still to this day, I do the same thing that you do where I don't hold, um well, I believe God is X, or I believe God is like X, and that is same as you, a conscious choice of like, I don't want to fall back into that kind of like black and white view of the divine. And so, yeah, so I worked with this mentor, and I needed that. I needed a mentor to hold the container for me of and I remember feeling tremendous fear. And again,
mm,
I think that was old religious programming too of like, "Oh, we're gonna touch this big thing, the divine, outside of like the safety of the boxes that I used to have before. And I don't know what that's gonna mean, and I don't know where we're gonna go." And so I needed a teacher to hold me in that. And yeah, I was able to restore that. I do have a connection to a local church. I remember researching all the churches online and looking for reading all their websites and looking for the one that was the least evangelical that I could find, the one that had, like, the least amount of language about saving people, and in fact, my first service I ever went to, the pastor talked about deconstruction in his
yeah,
sermon, and I was
yeah.
like, what? And so there are spaces out there, and as I've gotten a little bit more brave about my story at this church, and I don't go super regularly, to be honest with you, it's more for me, my church is an anchor for me in my community. And so
Mhm.
this church works in the foster care space, which is a passion of mine, and they're very like hands-on in the community. And again, they're very open-minded. They let me like serve. Um, volunteer in the ministry without like I grew up in churches where you had to like sign a statement of faith and they had to know you believe the same as them to even volunteer. And so for me it's this like anchor point for me in this community where I live now as opposed to being aligned with everything that they believe. And my journey's still evolving. Like I still, um, sometimes I even struggle with the word God still. Like it
Mm.
still sometimes feels hard on the tongue, and and Jesus. Like I feel more of a relationship to Jesus. Like when I pray, like see Him across from me. Like we have conversations, but like when people talk about like Christ and Christ consciousness, like, those things still have little again, the little religious tendrils that I'm still,
Mhm.
even all these years later, still working out. Um, my relation I would say, like, my relationship to God is, at this phase, more energetic. It's more of, like, this thing that's guiding me and this thing that, like, I came here to serve and to do, and be in service to, like, this bigger thing, but similar to you, I don't have theology behind what I think that is.
Yeah. No, I mean, I also struggle with the word God because, like I said, I don't think of God as a
Hard
male.
word.
So I
Yeah.
was like going back to calling it goddess, but that also didn't feel right because I really
Mm-mm.
believe it's like a genderless situation. So in the end, I've just landed on calling it God because I'm like that seems it just seems fine to me. But you mentioned the community thing, and I think that's a really important part
Yes.
of why people love going to church and why they're part of the
100%.
communities. And a lot of times, the community can be really great. Like I said, the best memories I have at church were from community. There were also some of the worst, depending on where what your community is, but it was
Mhm.
great. And I think just in general, we've gotten so far away from any sense of community. And a lot of people, I think, stay in the church a lot of the time because that is in a way their family, their space, their support, their feeling of belonging, which is what we all kind of look for, is that love and belonging. And I do a lot of community building work and it's really, really hard, honestly. So
It's
I feel
very
like,
hard.
yeah, the community stuff is so incredibly important. And the other thing you mentioned that I think is really important, and that I always tell people is that you don't have to believe everything in one situation. You can identify as whatever you want to identify. Like I identify as a witch. I don't believe every single witch principle. I don't follow Wicca, but there's things in Wicca that I think like do you no harm, do what you will. I follow that. I don't harm people and I believe as long as you're not harming people, I don't have an issue with what you're doing. There's things from my ancestry and Celtic um Druidry or like Celtic witchcraft that I agree with, and there's stuff I don't. Because ultimately, what I accept is all of this is filtered through humans. All of this information we have that
Yeah.
you're reading about is filtered through human beings. And so it's not that they did it ill intentioned. They probably had the best of intentions, but it is their interpretation. So what's more
Yes.
important is your interpretation of what you know to be true,
Yeah.
right?
What I do with my clients is I borrow the phrase from AA, take what you want and leave the rest. And that has been really supportive for my clients. And I had to do that when I returned to church, right? Because I first went and all my mind could do was receive information from the pulpit and like freak out and dissect all the reasons it was wrong. And instead of like being in the energy of the space and nourished by the space and the community. And so I teach that to all my clients of like nothing about this is like taking something as 100%. Like my client that went and I recently connected with that client the from the Mormon faith and she told me she's like I still use that. I still
Mhm.
it's a way to for me it's a way to support the mind. The mind that wants to like freak out and dissect all the things. It's like we can just take what we want and leave the rest. We don't have to go to the extremes of like accept it all or reject it all. That's not the paradigm that we live in anymore.
No, and I mean, like, did we ever live there if we're completely
Yeah.
honest? Like,
Well,
we're all
they
humans
tried to
and
make us live there.
they
Yeah.
tried, yeah, they tried to make us. But I feel like, we all have our life experiences. We all have our own hurts, our own things that we believe in, our own values. Naturally, unless you are extremely adept at removing those filters, you're filtering everything through that. So, that's what's coming out when someone reads a passage and then gives you their interpretation of it. That is what that is. That's an interpretation. It's the same thing if you want to go back to like the Bible, the translations. That is the person who's translating, that's their interpretation of the words. And again, a lot of times if you don't speak other languages, you might not realize that like there can be 5 different ways, and we don't think about it in English because you don't like reverse think it. But it's like in English, how many ways are there? Look up a thesaurus word and see how many different ways there are to translate something,
Mhm.
and look at all the different meanings and connotations that are inherently included in that word. Now go back to the Bible and know how many times this is translated from how many different languages by inherently flawed people with their own lens. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like you have to have that context in your head. And to your point, when someone's talking about it, make also your own critical thinking, your own judgment, your own experience based understanding that holds so much more weight than what somebody's just telling you. Now, if it's like a scientific or like fact based conversation, if there's a scholar who knows all the fact based or history based or whatever, and they can tell you that, that's great knowledge to know. And that's why I'm also like, stay curious with everything in
Mhm.
your life. Go with an open mind, go with curiosity. I have a lot of conversations with people from tons of different backgrounds and different opinions because I really enjoy getting their different opinions. Caveat, it took a lot of work, again, finding that sovereignty in myself to have these conversations and not take them on, because I would have a conversation with someone and I would go, oh, that's how it is. And that would be the interpretation. It took a really long
Mhm.
time for me to be able, I can hear this person's different experience or this person's, you know, story or whatever and take it for what it is. It's their story, it's their information, and they're totally entitled to it, and I support them in that, and I think I have all the tolerance in the world for other people's opinions unless they're hateful or harmful. Um, but that's what it is. It's not mine, you know? I think it's a really important thing ultimately is that I think the world would be a much nicer place if everyone reacted with love and empathy and also knew who they were and reacted
Right.
from that place, you
Right.
know?
And that's so for me, yeah. When I'm listening to you talk about those pieces, it's like, right, but these people, so when I think about the relationships I have with devout Christians and they're so stuck on, but this is what the Bible says, or this is X, Y, and Z. What I see is like they don't know themselves at all.
Yeah.
There's fear underneath of that, of like, well, but if I didn't follow this thing, what's the foundation? What's the truth then? How would I know how to act and navigate this world without this book and this system guiding me? And so, in some ways, conversations with people that don't believe or that are still in those spaces are like useless
Yeah.
because
But that's why I stopped talking to my mom about it because I love her.
totally, there's no
And
point. There's
it's
no
a
point at all.
fear-based thing. She's too scared to think of the alternative of something because it would mean having to
Right.
look back and look at everything, you
Yeah.
know?
And they are not my experience is they're not even conscious of that. They're not even
Yeah.
conscious of the fear that's underneath. And my when I was leaving, when I left, a lot of the extreme reactions that I got from friends and family, I could see immediately, and you mentioned this earlier, was their own because I was a leader in the church, always have been, always was. I think a lot of
Mhm.
people had me on the pedestal. I was so devout. I was so smart. I had this Bible and theology degree, studied Greek. It was like, oh my God, if Melissa doesn't believe this anymore, what does
Yeah,
that
what does
mean
it say
for
about
me?
me?
I
Mhm.
don't think that was like a conscious thought, but I could see it. I could see that in their reactions that my choices made them feel threatened about their own spiritual foundation. And there's just like, there's nothing we can do about that, and I believe and my own journey has been so wild, and we've only barely scratched the surface that I see that my teacher teaches this as well, I see the perfection in all of it and everything that I've gone through and how it's part of, like, what I'm here to do and serve, that I also have the same faith in other people's journeys. And so that also takes away my need to debate with people. There are times when the conversation comes and people want to ask, and I'm like, okay, usually those conversations don't end up great.
Hmm.
But I have such belief into what you teach and other people's sovereignty and like their soul's choice to come here and be on this path. I don't know why their soul chose to come here and do this and be on this journey and experience religion in this way. So I have no interest in going in and trying to, like, coerce someone to be different, and so same as you, I just kind of am like, "If someone wants to come and have a conversation, this is what I serve for the women that
Yeah.
come to me, but otherwise, I
I always say
just"
I'm
yeah.
not going to take that lesson from you because I'm like,
Yeah,
there's a
right,
lesson in
right,
here that
right,
I can't save you from. You need to learn the
right.
lesson. And so there's no point in me trying to coerce you or get you to see my way. Or I mean, that's the other thing I think whenever there's judgment, and I practice this with myself all the time. Whenever I have like a judgment about anything, I'm like, is this actually a judgment based on my values or something like that? Or is this a feeling of threat from inside of me of I don't think that's possible for me, or I wish I could do that, or what does this mean about me? Like you said, like when you know yourself and you know your emotions and you know your triggers and you know all these other things, it really is this constant growth cycle of being able to, reinvent yourself. And the fear of like, what does this say about me goes away because you're like, what does this say about me? Like, what's this new
Mhm,
thing I'm about to learn about myself?
the
How am
curiosity
I
again. Yeah.
exactly? And it changes, but you have to work through that fear because, especially with Christianity, where it's like you're going to hell, a lot of that fear is like, if I say or do this, I could go to hell. And you have to really unlearn that fear to be able to explore yourself. And to your point, like, if people always ask me like, what if you end up being Christian again? I'm like, what if that happens, it happens. I mean, I don't try to set out a life path or try to understand anything. I just let it be. I don't try to define it. And if I end up going back to the church one day, I might end up going back to the church one day, but I'll go back with, like you have, a completely different mindset around it. My family
Yeah.
used to be Jewish as well, so I'm like, maybe I'll go back to Jewish, like Judaism or Kabbalah, or I don't know. I follow where my curiosity leads me, and I learn so much. I expand my mind so much. A lot of people, like you said, they come to me as well because they're like, you can't see my 5 million books in my bookcase
Yeah.
behind me, but
Yeah.
they're like, Jess reads nonstop about all this stuff. She probably knows some obscure fact about Slavic
Yeah.
folklore or something. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's beautiful because then I'm able to understand more of the world and the ways that they worked. And oh my God, and see the similarities. Like when you study religion or whatever, like they're so pitted against each
So
other,
many
and it's
similarities.
like there's
Yeah.
similarities in all of the religions. We're all talking about the same things in different languages and different symbols and different words. And look at all these similarities, but you don't get that if you stay in that little, this is how it is. And there's no different. And this is all I know. And I'm scared to know anything different because that's scary and uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think as we wrap up soon, I think the thing I wanna say that's coming that's important for me to say is, um, that I do have a pretty strong opinion on is, we're all on our journeys and doing different things. I do feel that what we need more than anything in the world right now is more people connected to God and more of that relationship to the divine, specifically through our bodies, but that um I always am encouraging for people who are on, a deconstruction or questioning religion path, like, do it. It's good. Ask the questions. Don't abandon God. Don't abandon this thing that is love, that is guiding all of us, that has has something that we can't even understand in mind for all of us in our paths, and that feels really that's why I do the work that I do, is because that has a profound impact on the world and the state that the world is in, is that most people are disconnected from God, from themselves, and that
I would
feels
second
important.
saying community. I think it's really
Yeah.
important, but to look at communities just not only in your own little niche. Yeah, we'll wrap up in a minute, but I was literally just talking to someone about that. I'm trying to consciously build communities with people from many different
Mm.
backgrounds and different thoughts and ways of experiencing the world, because I think we tend to, because it's like us and it's comfortable, gravitate towards people and groups who mirror us. And there's definitely a benefit of that, and there's an ease in that, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but try doing something that feels uncomfortable with people that you don't know.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like with,
Mhm.
like with Muslims, for example, if that seems really scary to you, do what, I mean, I didn't do it consciously. It was because I was working with them, right? But it was lovely. Do something where you're putting yourself outside of your comfort zone with people who don't necessarily share the same opinions, or from different socioeconomic classes or different backgrounds or cultures. Part of the division that I'm seeing is the lack of empathy and love, and I think a lot of it comes from the fact that we're disconnected from each other. So it's easier to not have empathy for a group of people that have been propagandized and demonized and you see as not, the same as you, are bad. When you know those people and you know that that's actually not the truth, it opens your eyes, right? So I think the love, the curiosity, getting to know people from different backgrounds would really, really do a
And
lot.
part of my experience going back to church, and I actually want to bring an idea to that we have a new pastor, and he actually wrote a book on deconstruction, is like, my question is, what if there's still goodness that can be mined there? Like,
Mm,
what if, like, my local church, like, I teamed up with the pastor and was like, what if we started, like, some sort of deconstruction group where, like, I could come in and mentor? I'm sure there's more women just like me that want to be connected to community, maybe through a faith-based organization, but we don't know how to do that. And so I'm interested in, like, what if we didn't totally throw the baby out with the bathwater? What if we were interested in some, like, restoration and refinement and curiosity about what could that look like? And can we be women that, like, hold the nuance of, like, there's a lot of things that aren't perfect about this space, and there are a lot of things that aren't perfect about this, like, system. But what would happen, because churches really are a perfect vehicle for community. And so I'm interested in, like, what could be possibly be mined there,
mhm.
not from, like, a legalistic framework, but just, like, that curiosity of, like, I'm just curious about that,
Yeah,
because I
but I
agree
think
with
that's
you
good.
that that community piece is so important. And so
Yeah.
what would happen if we created more spaces in churches where, like, we could be more vocal about our doubts and our different ways of belief and seeing the world? Is
And I think
interesting
that's
to
super
me.
interesting because that's a vulnerability that you don't often see in church. It's you have to
Right.
be perfect,
Because
you
it's
know?
not controllable or defined.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so there are a lot of leaders that wouldn't entertain something like that, because how do you set parameters for something like that and definitions?
Yeah. No, I
But
get it. Thank you for a really lovely talk, Melissa. This was so
yeah.
nice. I will put your socials in the show notes so everybody can go follow you if they're interested or reach out to you if they want to work with you. Is there
Yeah.
anything else you want to share about how people can work with you?
Yeah, I have a 4-month container that I specifically hold women through restoring their relationship with God. And it's called Return. And it's, yeah, restoring authentic relationship with God, yourselves, and others, because they're all connected. And so that's what I'm passionate about, holding women through. There's no agenda for this, there's no place to arrive in this container, but it's all of what we talked about on this call, like finding yourself. The way I think about it is peeling layers. We'd
Hmm.
peel all not all. We peel a lot of the layers so that you are more in touch with that internal space and the divine in a way that feels genuine, and gives you, like, a foundation to move forward on. So yeah, in my Instagram bio is a link to book a call to chat about it, and yeah, I would love to hold any women through that journey.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you all for
Thank
listening. I hope
you.
you enjoyed the episode. I will put my socials in the show notes as well, so you can go follow me if you're interested. I also have a link tree where you can see how to work with me. And everybody have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you next time.